The interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. The veteran's name is John Peters. They were born on November 1st, 1942. He served in the Air Force during Vietnam and Desert Storm. He achieved the rank of Lieutenant Colonel, and we are recording this on November the 25th, 2013. I am William Richter, and I am conducting the interview. No relation. Thank you, Mr. Peters, for sitting down with us to talk about your history as a veteran. And if you'd like to start off with a little bit about yourself, where you were born, your family, anything like that?
Great. Well, I was born in Canton, Ohio, and I moved with my family when I was 5 years old to Ann Arbor, Michigan, where my dad assumed a position of a manager of a wholesale plumbing and heating company. And I stayed in Ann Arbor, Michigan through high school graduation. So I did all my public education in Ann Arbor, Michigan, graduated from Pioneer High School, and then left Ann Arbor to attend Otterbein College, which is a small Christian liberal arts college in Westerville, Ohio, just north of Columbus. And was in school there 4 years, and graduating with a Bachelor of Arts with an economics major and a commission in the United States Air Force through the ROTC program.
Okay. And would you like to talk about your time in the ROTC program? What was that like for you?
Well, when I started Otterbein College, my father had enlisted in the Army in 1943 when I was 1 year old, because he felt it was his duty to go and fight in the war along with many men. And so when I showed up at Otterbein College, I met Major, I think, or it could have been Colonel William Comstock, who was our professor of air science. And they had a table set up on the lawn outside of our major college building, which was Towers Hall, and it just seemed like it was sort of a fun activity to get involved with, and so I signed up in ROTC as a freshman, and I stayed in ROTC obviously for my full 4 years of college.
Great. And would you like to talk about where did life take you after ROTC and your undergraduate?
Well, after I finished my undergraduate work at Otterbein, and I was at that time engaged to my wife of almost 50 years, and I didn't want to enter active duty unmarried, and so I made the decision that I wanted to take an educational delay and attend the University of Michigan, which was always my dream, to get my master's degree. But it was evident to my parents in high school that my academic reading skills were probably not up to the level that needed to be to attend a college like University of Michigan as an undergrad and be in the literature, science, and arts program, which is very competitive with pre-law and pre-med students, and felt that Otterbein was a better direction for me to go in. So I applied and was accepted to the University of Michigan Graduate School of Business, and I returned to Ann Arbor for 2 years to finish my MBA at Michigan. And then I was married in January after I graduated, and then my wife came, when she came to Ann Arbor, then she was an elementary school teacher while I was in graduate school. So I didn't really have any contact with the military during those 2 years. Mm-hmm. I drove a school bus to help pay for our rent. Mm-hmm. And she taught school, and we lived in student apartments, and we had an apartment with not a bedroom. We just had a living room with a height of bed and a big closet and a kitchen and a bathroom, but it survived, and we were able to finish and graduate in 1966 with my Master's of Business Administration.
Okay. And would you like to talk briefly about your interaction with some of the students that you worked with while you were there?
Well, when I was at Michigan, my interaction basically was my school bus driving, which I drove 50 miles in the morning and 50 miles at night, delivering and picking up middle and high school students. So it was quite quite a challenge. I even had one student jump out the window once, but it was a good job because it gave me the weekends to study, and that gave me the flexibility that I needed to get through the program. So I would drive a school bus, go to school, study, drive a school bus, study at night, and then on weekends I could study. But it was a pretty strenuous time, but also productive. So.
All right. And where did life take you afterwards? Did you go back into the military?
Yeah, after graduate school, then I waited the infamous package that came with your orders, telling you what exotic place you were going to move to. And when I graduated from Otterbein in 1964, many of my classmates had gotten, as they got their assignments, they were going to Japan, they were going to Oregon, they were going to Washington, they were going to Florida, they were going to all these places that I had never been. I basically lived my life for my first 21 years in either Michigan or Ohio, and did not really have any extensive travel growing up as a child. So I was excited to get my envelope with my assignment. And when I was in ROTC at Otterbein College, I did my summer camp at Lockbourne Air Force Base, and we did all of our military balls at Lockbourne Air Force Base. So I can still remember to this day sitting in my yellow Volkswagen outside of the student housing in Ann Arbor, Michigan, with my envelope in hand, with my wife next to me saying, I wonder where this will take us. And we opened the envelope, and it said 840th Combat Support Group, Lockbourne Air Force Base, Ohio. And I could not believe it, that my whole life I had waited for one chance to live someplace other than Ohio and Michigan. And I ended up in Ohio at Lockbourne Air Force Base. So that's where I started my career.
Okay. So let's talk about your first assignment there.
Okay.
What was that like? What did you do?
Well, my first assignment was, I got an assignment in the comptroller career field, which was dealing with all aspects of financial management. Mm-hmm. And my first job was as a management analyst in the Combat Support Group. And so my first assignment was to go to Wichita Falls, Texas, and go to 6 weeks worth of school at the Management Analysis School. And that was an interesting time for me because there were 3 shifts going to school, and my shift was 6 in the morning until noon. And so we had to get up really early, and we were done at noon. And it was June, July, and August, and it was so beastly hot that you couldn't do anything outside of your room because of the heat until the evening. So I spent in the mornings at school, in the afternoons at the Officers Club pool, and the evenings studying. Mm-hmm. And then I showed up at my first Air Force Base assignment, all excited about being a management analyst. And I walked into an office, and I had a civilian boss by the name of Herman Dinkler. And it was a very interesting assignment because we did all the analytical work about all the performance standards of an Air Force base, to include cost per flying hour, maintenance per flying hour, retention rates, Officers Club profits, everything that dealt with analysis, which is very interesting because that skill that I learned back in 1966 in tech school is a skill that I still use today working for Clemson University. But I was a young officer, and I really wanted to do something, and it was like going to work with your grandparents. Mm-hmm. And so it was to some degree a very frustrating time because I never felt like I was going to progress and really get into the area of being able to brief a general or a commander. And so it was during that time that we also had under our jurisdiction the graphics department. Back in those days, there wasn't PowerPoint, there weren't computers, there were transparencies made up by graphics people. And when we did all of our briefings, you would go with a ton of slides, about so thick, and you would just put one on after another during your briefing. So in that office was a Sergeant Salvino, And he's the one, after about a year, put me on to an assignment in Hawaii at the United States Air Force Security Service office in Wheeler Air Force Base, Hawaii, and he said he thought that would be a good assignment for me. So I applied for that assignment through the normal Air Force personnel channels, and lo and behold, about 4 months later comes in, I noticed that I was going to be assigned to Hawaii. So that was pretty exciting for us, for somebody that had never traveled.
Yeah, definitely.
So my wife was pregnant at the time, and so we hopped on. We had the baby, our first son, Jim, and 7 weeks after he was born, we hopped on an airplane and we were off to Hawaii for 3 years of an assignment in the middle of the ocean.
Okay, and talk about your experience in Hawaii. What was that like, and what was your specific assignment? How did you interact with your coworkers?
Okay, well, when I came to Hawaii, I was in charge of the management analysis section of the Pacific Security region of the United States Air Force Security Service. So what we did is we did all the performance indicators of all of the bases that were under our jurisdiction. And then we also were able to go out to the various bases and sort of meet our counterparts, help them with issues, learn about issues, and sort of be like, I don't want to say a supervisor, but we were sort of like a consultant helping them with issues. It was during my time in Hawaii that we found out that my youngest son, actually my oldest son, Jim, who was our only son at that time, had been born with a condition called diabetes insipidus, which is a malfunction of the renal tubes around the kidneys, which means that he doesn't retain any sort of liquid. So he has to constantly drink because he doesn't retain any fluids. And he got seriously ill in about our second month in Hawaii. And he ended up in Tripler Army Hospital for about 6 weeks. And it was there that we learned the true benefits of the military health system and what it meant to have a military career with guaranteed health benefits. And so once he was stabilized, then obviously our time in Hawaii was a lot better. It was during the same time that we had taken a dog with us to Hawaii, and in those days the dog had to be in quarantine for 4 months. So we spent part of the day after work in the kennel with our dog and part of the day in the hospital with our son. And so it did make a really good start to the tour, but we got through those times and began to really enjoy Hawaii. We found it was a beautiful place to live, but it was also the first place we'd ever lived that we were a minority because of the Oriental influence in the island. But we made some nice friends, and friends that we still correspond with today. And I had an opportunity to travel all through the Orient, all the way from Taiwan all the way to northern Japan, Guam, the Philippines. So I had an opportunity to really go from a young person who had never really seen anything but Michigan and Ohio growing up, and Texas for my first technical training, to being able to travel the world, and that was really fun.
Excellent. And what did you do when you went to these different countries?
Well, what we did is we would visit the bases and we would go through the procedures. We had a checklist of things that they were supposed to do, and we would go through the procedures, and we would have them answer questions about if they're following Air Force regulations, show us what you're doing to meet this requirement. So we were sort of a semi-inspection team, sort of a semi-consulting team that helped them prepare for any sort of inspection that might be coming down the road from a third party that occurs in the Air Force, which they call the IG team.
Okay. And what was your favorite country to visit in that time?
I don't know if there was a favorite country. I think I think Japan was sort of unique. But each of those countries were a little different, and so I didn't really have, I don't think I would say I had a specialty. I do know that when we went to Taiwan, the first day we were taken out to a restaurant by our host, and we went to this restaurant, and it was like a seven-row restaurant, like a dinner theater with all these acrobats, and they brought our meal to us, and it was raw fish and rice, and but you couldn't, there was nothing to drink, you know, and so that, unless you wanted to drink beer, and I wasn't a beer drinker, and there weren't any soft drinks, so it was a tough meal, but we got through it. But you know, that was one event that I remember stuck in my mind. So.
Okay. Do you have anything else you'd like to add about Hawaii?
No, it was a beautiful place to live. The temperature was about the same every day. We lived in a block house on top of a mountain. We had no heater or no air conditioner. We had single wall construction, so when you hung up a picture in one room, the nail went through into the other room. So then you had to hang up a picture in the other room to cover up the nail. Where we lived on top of a mountain, we lived on Puninoni Street, and it rained every day because the way we were set, there would always be a cloud that would come over and drop what we would call pineapple juice. And we were there not a very long time when we had planned to go to the beach and found out that it was raining, so we decided to cancel our trip, and we called our friends, and they said, well, you just need to come down off the mountain, it's beautiful. So we got in the car and went down the mountain, it was sunshiny. So so I remember that as something that always stuck in my mind, of the constant rain that we had. But other than that, it was just a wonderful place to live. The beaches were beautiful, and the job was fun, and so it brought back a lot of memories. So
great. And where did you go afterwards?
Well, when I was at Lockbourne Air Force Base, I had the opportunity to go to Myrtle Beach Air Force Base to a school that the Air Force was running. And so when I showed up at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base and I saw the ocean, I said, I think this would be a fun place to live. So as I finished my tour in Hawaii, you always fill out a sheet about where's your dream assignment, where do you really want to go? And so I put down Myrtle Beach Air Force Base as my first choice. And I got an assignment to Pope Air Force Base, which is attached to Fort Bragg. And so what we did in Hawaii was that we always traded children so we could all travel. So we went to another island. I don't know if it was Maui or Kauai, for a 2-day visit, and some friends of ours watched our one child, Jim. And when we landed in Honolulu, coming back from our trip, they said, you need to go to personnel because they want to change your assignment. So, and our household goods had already been shipped, and they were already on a boat somewhere going across the ocean. So we went to personnel, and we found out that we were going to be reassigned to Myrtle Beach Air Force Base if that was agreeable to us. And we said, yes, we'd be very happy to go to Myrtle Beach, because that was my first choice. So they changed our assignment, and off we went to Myrtle Beach.
Excellent. Okay. And what was it like changing from Hawaii to Myrtle Beach?
Well, we still had the ocean, so that was a plus. It was much colder in the wintertime, but it was a fun base. And what I had done is I had requested an additional training slot in the Air Force Budget Officer School, because I'd had 2 assignments as a management analyst, and in order to progress in my career field, I needed to go into another phase of comptrollership, and so I asked to go to budget school. So off I went to budget school, again spending another summer at Wichita Falls in the summertime, where it is super hot, and became fully qualified as a budget officer. So when I came to Myrtle Beach, I was going into a new job. I had a staff of people that I didn't really ever have to manage before, so that was my first management experience. And I walked into Myrtle Beach Air Force Base, and in August, and the comptroller, Cliff Readout, handed me the keys to the office and said, I'm going to be retiring, and so you're going to be in charge of this until the new comptroller comes in. So I went from no management experience to being responsible for an office of 50 to 70 people, learning a brand new job, and having to close out the fiscal year. Because back in those days, the fiscal year closed out the end of October, and so I had to close out the fiscal year. So that was, I went sort of from a job that really wasn't very stressful to a job that was really stressful.
Okay.
And but that was a fun time for me. And then when the new comptroller came in, then I moved back to the budget office and did that job for 2.5 years.
Okay. And what else would you like to share with us about your time at Myrtle Beach for that assignment? Well,
that was it was a fun assignment because there was a lot of people our age, a lot of people with children, and in October of the year that we moved Myrtle Beach was when our second son Kevin was born. So we added another addition to our family. But there was a lot of people our age, a lot of people with kids, and so we developed a lot of friendships. And it was a single wing base, which made the budget much simpler. And back in those days, the funding was fairly restrictive because of the Vietnam War, but we were still able to do certain things, that quality of life issues that you were trying to do on your base to make things better. So, and it was really what I felt a really fun assignment.
Okay,
so.
Great. And where did you go from there?
Well, what happened was that in my second year at Myrtle Beach, I got notice that they were going to send in a second lieutenant, Howie Russell, for me to train. And I knew that normally you don't have two officers in an office, which told me I was probably leaving. And so I became very good friends with Colonel Doug White, who was the base commander, who was a HR guy. And so he had contacts in the system. So one day I asked him if he could find out what they had in mind, what he thought was going to happen to me. And they said, well, there was a quote of undesirable assignments about ready to be made, and that I was being looked at to be a missile officer. And what that meant was that you go sit in a missile silo. And that really wasn't something that I wanted to do with my life. I already had a master's degree from Michigan. And a lot of people went to missiles to get master's degrees because that helped them in their promotion. I didn't need that anymore. And so I said, I think I better take some action. And when I was in Hawaii, I still remember this, I played golf with Colonel Mosley, who was our communications commander. And he always told me, he said, if you're going to succeed in the Air Force, you have to take care of yourself. You've got to be aggressive in your assignments. And so, thinking back to that piece of advice, when I heard the undesirable assignments, I called up Security Service headquarters and I asked them, what do you have that's going to be coming available, in the next year? And they said, we have a base comptroller job coming open at San Vito, Italy. And I said, I'd like to apply for that. So I went in and I filled out my paperwork and applied to become the base comptroller at San Vito, Italy.
Okay.
And it wasn't much after that those assignments started coming out, but because I'd been selected for that position because I had the security service clearance that I needed because of my work in Hawaii, that they didn't have to pay to do another security clearance. That made me a little more valuable to them. So they went ahead and selected me for San Vito, and so that was my next stop in this career.
All right. If you want to tell us a little bit about your time in Italy, touch on what it was like to live there, and the housing arrangements especially.
Sure. Well, we moved to Italy with 2 kids, And when we first landed, the first thing we had to do was find a place to live. And in Italy you have, or in almost every assignment, you have an Air Force sponsor that sort of welcomes you to the base and sort of shows you around and helps you. So my sponsor in Italy, who actually worked for me as my budget officer because I was going as a comptroller there, worked with the procurement officer, Jim Berriger. And so George and Jim took me down to Jim's villa on the Adriatic and to see if that's where we'd like to live. And so we went in and we really liked it, and we just had to convince the landlord that we would be good tenants, and we were able to do that. And so we moved into a big villa in Italy, 3 bedrooms, 12-foot high ceilings, a living room that you could probably put 50 people in, all marble floors. But it had no closets and no kitchen cabinets, because closets are considered a room in Italy and they're taxed, and cabinets meant that the house was finished. So if you didn't put cabinets in the kitchen, that meant the house wasn't finished, so your taxes were lower. And actually in Italy, it was not uncommon to see a house with a flat roof with steps going up to nowhere. And that was an indication that they were going to build another floor, but they just hadn't done it yet. So the Italians were very ingenious in getting out of their taxes. So we moved in to our house in Italy in July. It was about 100 degrees and there was no air conditioning in the house. But because we were on the Adriatic, we got a nice breeze in the evening. But we also had no screens. So along with the breeze came the mosquitoes. So I spent the first week in the house trying to build screens and put them in from the upstairs, because I couldn't reach them because it was about 40 feet off the top of the ground. So, but we lived in that villa for a year, and then we had an opportunity to move on base, and that was good, because the first year we would share a ride to base. The procurement officer and I would ride together in one car, and then my wife and his wife and our kids would ride to base in another car. We were about 5 miles away from the base, to do their shopping and go to any sort of athletic events or activities for the kids. Jim and I would go in the morning and come back at night. So, but the 2 things that you could pretty much count on in Italy is either your house would be ripped off or your car would be stolen. I mean, it was pretty standard procedure that was going to happen sometime during your 3-year tour. So we decided that we would take that opportunity to move on base. So we moved from a villa with high ceilings to base housing that had, I think, 7.5-foot ceilings. That was prefab housing. But it did make it nice because I could ride my bike to work in 5 minutes, and I could be home with my kids to play after work. So that was good. So, and then we had a wonderful time going into the economy. We would go shopping at the markets. So there would be fresh produce every day. So you go to the market to shop, and then we would go to eat at the restaurants and try to decipher the menu, because we learned enough Italian to be able to ask directions and eat. And so we found the eating and the shopping to be really fun.
Good. All right. Is there anything else you'd like to talk about with Italy?
Well, what happened in Italy was that it was when I decided that I wanted to start thinking about teaching some college classes. So I signed up and was hired by the University of Maryland to teach classes at night or at lunchtime. And so I started teaching on the faculty of the University of Maryland management classes, marketing classes. And what that did is that provided us a little extra money that we could travel on. So we would teach a class and then we'd go on a trip. And I would teach a class and we'd go on a trip. And so that gave us the opportunity to travel throughout Europe. And so sometimes we took our kids, and sometimes we just went, my wife and I, and we took our kids. Both of our boys learned to ski in Austria, because we had an annual ski trip to Austria that we would ride the train from Brindisi, Italy, up to middle of Austria and stay at a pension, the base of a ski hill, and we would eat our 3 meals there, and then we would ski during the day. So that was really fun.
Excellent.
So we had a lot of wonderful travel, a lot of opportunity to intermix with Italians. We did meet an Italian family there that was our landlord, and shared some Christmas times with them. He lived in the bottom of our village. Jim and Tina lived in the first floor, and we lived in the second. And we used to pay our rent in a pool hall. So we always figured we were relatively safe because we figured he was part of the mafia. So we never had any trouble with being ripped off or having our car stolen, but we just felt more comfortable living on the economy. So that was a really good assignment. It's probably our most favorite assignment because of the travel, of being in a foreign country, of intermixing with Italians. We did meet another couple through my friend Jim Berger had an accident, and car accident. We went to rescue him and met this couple, and we ended up trading meals back and forth with them. And so it's interesting how you can go through a whole meal of eating and drinking wine and not speak any English and yet understand what they're trying to say. So, so that was a real adventure, but it's a lot of fun. So
okay. Yeah. And if you want to talk about where you went after Italy and
sure,
further assignments.
Yeah. Well, when it was time to leave Italy, I made a decision that I wanted to get my kids closer to their grandparents, and so I requested and received an assignment at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, and I was fortunate enough to be selected to work in the F-16 Special Programs Office, which was during the time of the full-scale development of the F-16 fighter program. That program was a very interesting program in that we were buying an airplane, developing an airplane that had the United States and 4 foreign countries involved in its development. And what that meant was, and that was called the European Procurement Group. And what we were trying to do in that procurement was to make sure that every country had a certain percentage of parts in any airplane. And I worked with the foreign nationals on that airplane. All the change orders and all the funding of things that dealt with putting an airplane together with parts from 5 foreign countries. And I worked for General Abinson, who was a really wonderful general, and did that for 2 years. And then I was called over by the Aeronautical Systems Division comptroller and told that I was going to be moving over to be the Aeronautical Systems Division financial kind of finance chief. And that office was one of the largest accounting finance offices in the Air Force. And that office paid for over 35% of the Air Force budget because we paid for all the airplanes, all the engines, all the spare parts, all the missiles. And so I became an agent of the U.S. Treasury, and my name went on every one of those checks. And when I asked him if I was a volunteer or non-volunteer, he said, "You're just the best guy I got, and you're going over there." So I showed up over there to an office of, like I said, probably 250, and that's when I learned the art of walking around, managing by walking around. And I would start every morning in one side of my office, and I would walk completely through the office, welcoming people to work and seeing how they were doing. And I took it as a challenge to learn everybody's name, and I would get my roster of my office, and I would look down there, and if I saw somebody's name I didn't recognize, then I would go into the office that day, specifically speak to them until I had everybody's names memorized. And so that was a very interesting assignment from a management standpoint, the size and the complexity of the office and the mission of that, and the fact that it was, again, a very large responsibility. So I did that for 2 years.
Okay.
And then I was looking at where was I going to go next, and I'd always dreamed of living in Colorado. And since we learned to ski in Austria, I thought, wouldn't it be fun to live in Colorado and be close to the mountains? And so I applied and got accepted to go to the Air Force Accounting and Finance Center in Denver, Colorado. So we packed up the kids and headed west.
All right. And if you'd like to tell us about what you did in Colorado and.
Well, I came to Colorado working in the material division. It was probably my least fun assignment. It was basically 95% civilian workforce. You had a very narrow responsibility. My strengths were in the people relationships, in the supervision, not so much in the general bookkeeping of what we were having to do. And so I would say that was probably my least desirable assignment. Professionally, it was probably one of my most fun assignments for after school or after work activities because of the skiing and because of the wonderful church that we got involved with at Faith Presbyterian Church, and for our kids' activities because we were close. It was pretty much, we got on a schedule that was, it was a 9-day work schedule out of 10 days. So you can have a 3-day weekend every other weekend. And so that made it really nice.
Yep.
So you work 9-hour days for 8 days. You worked an 8-hour day the 9th day, and you had the 10th day off.
Excellent.
So it was a more flex schedule, and it was really fun. But professionally, it just didn't match my skills.
Okay.
And so when I finished that assignment, and I really wanted to stay one more year, thinking that I was going to retire at Denver, but they had a policy that you could only stay 3 years, and so I had to find a place to go. So I applied, and I got an assignment at Langley Air Force Base in Hampton, Virginia.
Okay.
So we packed our cars up and we headed east all the way to Hampton, Virginia.
All right, that's quite the drive.
Yeah, it was 2 days. And we had one car that didn't have air conditioning in it because you didn't need air conditioning in Colorado. So coming across Illinois in the middle of July with no air conditioning is pretty gruesome. So, but we made it to Langley Air Force Base, and I was sort of put back into the operational area of comptrollership, and similar to my job in Hawaii, I was responsible for all the inspection reports. I was responsible for going out to bases and preparing them for inspections. So I was involved with a lot of compliance issues, and I found it was really a fun time because I was able to travel, and anytime I traveled west, then I would stop by to see my parents in Michigan on my way back, and so that gave me some really good flexibility, and it was a fun assignment with a lot of travel and a lot of ability to see a lot of parts of the country because I went to almost every base in Langley that Langley was responsible for, which ranged all the way from South Florida to California.
Okay.
So I did that for 2 years, and then the first TAC fighter wing comptroller job became open, and the comptroller at Tactical Air Command selected me to have that job, which in the first TAC fighter wing is the first fighter wing to go to war. So we were battle ready 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. So we practiced a lot of mobility exercises. We went to war. We were one of the first groups to go to war if we would deploy. So we did exercise after exercise, getting prepared. So that was also a very large office of people with a lot of responsibility. More on the people side of it than the money side of it. Where at Wright-Patterson, it was more the money side of it versus the people side. So both of them were very large offices that I was responsible for.
Okay. And where would you like to go after that? Where did
Well, that was at that point I had reached my 20-year point in the Air Force, and I was trying to make a decision what I wanted to do, where I wanted to retire, and in the back of my mind, I had that picture of Myrtle Beach Air Force Base from 1971 to 74, where the town closed up on Memorial Day or Labor Day, and it opened on Memorial Day, and you had 9 months of absolutely nice, quiet living, and I thought maybe that's where I want to go back to retire. So I asked Colonel Martin, my boss at Langley, I said, if the comptroller position at Myrtle Beach ever opens up, I would like to be considered for that. And he called me one day and he said that that position is going to open up, and if you would like to go, we'll sign you there. And so we talked to our family and we decided, yeah, that would be a good place to finish. So we packed up and headed to Myrtle Beach in 1988. And I went there in January 1988. While we were at Langley Air Force Base, my wife decided to go back to school. And so she became a physical therapy assistant and had just taken a job in a local hospital. So when I got the assignment, we decided it would be good for her to finish 1 year of her training. So she stayed back, and then I was at Langley for 6 months, and I just commuted back and forth about every third weekend. So, and then the family moved there in July of 1988.
Okay. And talk about being back at Myrtle Beach.
Well, that was a fun time because I was a base comptroller, and I had my own office, and had a wonderful staff there, and it was a good mission. We were A-10, and so it was single wing base, so it wasn't complicated. Had really wonderful commanders and good people to work for, and we were there. And then it was during that time that we were getting ready for Desert Storm, and so we did a lot of mobility exercises, again preparing to go to war. And I remember when it looked like that might happen, I was in the wing commander's office because I was responsible for all the accounting and finance people who had to take money with them so they could go buy groceries and on the economy, or go buy building supplies. And he said, I don't think we're going to go. I don't think this deployment is going to happen. And then about 2 days later, we got the official word. And so I was in my second job at Myrtle Beach, because everybody had a job during mobility. I was a mobility control chief, which meant I worked from 6 o'clock at night to 6 o'clock in the morning, 12-hour days. And so I was on duty when everybody deployed the very first time. I was on the flight line when the airplanes were leaving, and the people were leaving on the airplanes that were taking crew chiefs and support people. So it brought back to me memories of my dad in World War II, deploying to go to Germany. And I still remember this one instance where it was, I don't know what time it was in the morning, 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, and we were on the flight line, and the airplane was ready to leave, and I looked over to this light post, and there was a family over there, a mother and her kids, and they're all crying. And I go over to talk to them and found out they'd only been at Myrtle Beach a week. Didn't really know who to talk to, didn't know where to go, and her husband and their father was being deployed to Iraq. So away he goes, and so I just remember that. I said that to me was the picture of what happened in World War II, when all the husbands left and their wives were left stranded in the United States. So, but it was fun. I was there when they left, and I was there when they came back, and that was really fun. So, and it was interesting because I was still teaching classes then, and I ended up teaching over 50 college classes through San Vito, and then back at Langley Air Force Base, and then back at Myrtle Beach. And so I actually started a class the week of the deployment, and then I ended the class when they redeployed back to the base right before they came back. So I got to be there on the flight line when the airplane landed, and the husbands and wives were coming home to their families. So it was really fun.
Yeah, it must have been a great sight.
Yeah.
Okay. And where do we go from there? Where else?
Well, there's a couple things that happened at Myrtle Beach that really had shaped my life.
Okay.
When I showed up at Myrtle Beach, I was put in charge of the Air Force open house. And what that was is that we opened the Air Force Base the first week of June. We brought in the Air Force Thunderbirds to do their aerial demonstrations. We had static displays, and I was responsible for that open house, which was usually 50 to 60,000 people. And so I did that for 3 years. as a project officer for the open house.
Mm-hmm.
And I brought this with me to share that after my third open house, I received the key to the city of Myrtle Beach from the mayor, Bob Grissom. And so he surprised me at a staff meeting one day just before I retired and gave me the key to the city of Myrtle Beach. So this is something I've always treasured as one of my Air Force mementos. So, and then the other thing that happened during my tour at Myrtle Beach Air Force Base is I was awarded the Tactical Air Command Comptroller of the Year award. And I felt very honored because that was a competition against all my fellow comptrollers throughout Tactical Air Command. And to receive an award like that at the end of my career was very touching to me. So those are two of my favorite awards that I received in the Air Force. And then it was during that time that I also recognized that Air Force life was going to come to an end, and that there had to be life after the Air Force. And so what I decided to do was get involved in the community. So I joined the Rotary Club, and I became friends with the president of Ori Georgetown Tech, and I ran his scholarship program for his teachers. And because I knew that I wanted to work at a college or university after Air Force, because I like being around young people. I had trained so many young people in the Air Force, and I felt a desire to continue that relationship in the in my next career, and not to go or follow the route that many military do, as they go back, especially if you're an officer and you've been in the financial procurement area. You can get into defense contracting, but I just decided I want to do something completely different. So I got to meet Kent Sharples, and then I met Dr. John Newby, who was the president of Southern Wesleyan University. Back then it was known as Central Wesleyan University. And he came to Rotary Club one day to do a makeup, and I asked if I could speak with him after the meeting, and we spoke, and I told him about my desire to want to work at Clemson because my son was a freshman up here and we'd been up here, and I really wanted to get back in the college environment, having grown up in Ann Arbor, Michigan, but I didn't want to go where it was cold and where it snowed and it was icy. And we just loved the beauty of the upstate. And he told me individual for me to call, and that led me to the contacts with other people within the HR department at Clemson. And it was through that contact and through Ken Sharples making a phone call to my boss that I was able to be interviewed and selected for a position at the National Dropout Prevention Center at Clemson University. So I started work in October of 1991 at Clemson University. And so I finished 22 years now at Clemson, and it's been a wonderful experience. And my Air Force training back from my very first Air Force school, a management analysis school at Shepherd Air Force Base, and all the analytical training that I was provided has greatly benefited me and at my job at the National Dropout Prevention Center. So it's been a wonderful working career of 47 years.
All right. Anything else you'd like to talk about? Reflections on your military service? Anything else that you've learned that you'd like to talk about?
Well, I felt very pleased that I had the opportunity to serve in the military. My dad gave up his career to go into war to fight in Germany when I was 1 year old because he felt it was his responsibility to protect and defend our country and our way of life. And I felt that I wanted to continue on that tradition. And I look back at my Air Force career as a wonderful time in my life that I wouldn't trade for any other occupation. It provided me travel opportunities, it provided me many friends, it provided me skills that I use daily, and I love to be an American, and I love to know the fact that I was able to serve our country. And I guess it's my desire that young people today would feel the same way about this wonderful country we live in and want to serve in some degree or fashion to help us maintain our lifestyle, because I know that there are many countries in the world that have people that despise our lifestyle and the freedoms that we have. And we've seen that occur many times, not as much on our soil, but you still know that there are people out there that can do that and will do that if they can. And so I love my Air Force career, and I love to salute the flag and say the pledge and know that I was part of something that helped protect our lifestyle.
All right. Mr. Peters, thank you so much for serving our country and talking with us today.
Well, it's been my pleasure to be here at Clemson University, a school that salutes the military, that appreciates military service, that has done so much to recognize military veterans that have come through Clemson, and I'm just glad to be part of that tradition now as an employee at Clemson University.
All right.
God bless America.